Dear attendees, thank you very much for joining this workshop series. And my task here is to explain you how did we get here. I am Ramon Rosello Mora. I am the head of the Marine Microbiology Group of the IMEDEA in Palma, in Mallorca. And what I'm going to tell you is how did we get to this point to favor a path forward for naming uncultured organisms. First of all, I would like to introduce what taxonomy is. I have given here several definitions. There are many more, but all of them actually define taxonomy as the theory and practice of classifying organisms. In none of these definitions you will see that there is a need of preserving living specimens to classify microbes or any other kind of living being. From my point of view, taxonomy pursues the generation of a classification that is of general purpose. This means can be widely used, and this should be based nowadays in the era of the informatics on comprehensive databases and interactive databases. And also, the system that we produce should be in the first side operational. This means it works. Should be predictive. When we hear a name, we can predict some properties of these organisms, ecological properties, phenotypic metabolic properties, and it should be also universal. This means that should apply to all kinds of organisms of the discipline. And finally, it should be pragmatic. This means that the users do not need to deal with the theory behind it. Here I would like to note that there is no official classification in taxonomy. We always recall the principle of taxonomic freedom when we are classifying organisms. However, I really doubt that this freedom exists because it is constrained by the subcommittees, reviewers, and editors publishing taxonomic papers. We only have an official nomenclature that is ruled by the International Code of Nomenclature for Prokaryotes, the ICNP. Already, Cohen, my favorite taxonomist of the last century, he already indicated 50 years ago that too much attention had been given to nomenclature and less to the bacteria themselves. As you can see, nothing is related to the preservation of living specimens when we are talking about taxonomy and nomenclature. Here I would like to differentiate between what is the concept of a unit and the definition of a unit. The concept actually is the idea that we have of the unit, what is a unit, and generally is immutable. I think in microbiology we all will agree that a species, especially, is a monophyletic group of organisms with high genomic and phenotypic homogeneity. This concept is very broad, very universal, and probably nobody would disagree with it. What is different is the definition. The definition is the way that we embrace the unit, the parameters that we use to embrace this unit. And this really changes along the time because depends on the capabilities that we have to observe characters. Therefore, it evolves in parallel with the technical developments. So one of the most important premises to classify organisms is to have them in pure culture. This means that we have to be able to obtain the organism from its own environment and grow them into the laboratory as pure culture in order to be able to understand and to explore its properties. And then when we have this organism, we can actually apply the best practices in classifying organisms. We can understand monophily, so that the group of organisms in study are monophyletic, and those have a high homogeneity in their genomic and phenotypic properties. The requirement of a pure culture for taxonomic purposes comes actually from the ICNP, from the Bacteriological Code, because in order to validly publish a name, what we need to have is to deposit a living culture in two different international collections. This living culture is called the type strain, which is the voucher that links the name with the classification, with the species classification. Then you can publish the description in a given journal, and finally this can be listed into the notification of the validation lists of the IGSEM. So I think that the major bottleneck is this need to have a deposit of type material in culture collections to advance in microbial taxonomy and nomenclature. Just to exemplify what I'm meaning, here we have some commonplaces in microbiology. The most important commonplaces are in the first side, that what Barney Whitman he already proposed several years ago, that there are around between 4 to 6, 10 to the 30 prokaryotic organisms in the biosphere. So with this tremendous amount of organisms out there are some different calculations on how many species are out there. The very optimistic, they think that there are 1 million or millions of species, 10 to the 12, and or the more pessimistic, that they think that there are at most 30,000 different species. Our calculations, they gave us the idea that between 1 to 10 million is something that is really feasible and true for the number of species that we might have in the biosphere. However, these figures, they contrast a lot with the real number of species that we have now classified. In year 2021, we have around 17,000 species described, that they contrast with the vast amount of species that we are expecting to catalog in the future. So where do we see where the problem is? And the problem is in the bacteriological code that needs, to our opinion, changes to be implemented. If we look at Rule 18a, already says that whenever possible, and it would be nice to know what whenever possible means in this case, the type of species should be a designated strain, and Rule 30 indicates that this strain must be deposited in two international different collections. However, if we look at this code until year 2000, if you had a species classification that was based on a simple description or a preserved specimen or even an illustration, this could serve as type. However, this Rule 30 was changed in year 2001, and from then and on, it is necessary to deposit a pure culture in two different collections in order to have a nomenclatural type validly published. To circumvent this problem, the candidatus status was created for organisms that had been not brought into pure culture, but in general, these descriptions were just for organisms with highly conspicuous characteristics and not for the vast majority of microorganisms that they have no special morphological or phenotypic characteristics. The major problem of this candidatus status is that has no priority in the name. This means that if somebody else isolates this organism that you propose with a name and gives a completely different name, this name will have, the new name will have priority. And also this status has no standing in the bacteriological code. Already 5 years ago, Kostas Konstantinidis and me, we just proposed that metagenomics could help a lot in classifying microorganisms. Actually, the binning technologies allows us to isolate different marks from metagenomic data, and these marks are, and it will be of much more quality, much better quality in the future. And this allows us to be able to understand the phylogeny based on either 16S RNA genes or essential protein genes, allows us to calculate taxonomic parameters as NAI, AAI, and any other kind of parameters, and also allows us to retrieve metabolisms and infer metabolism from these marks. And this can be proven by also applying other meta-omics like transcriptomics or proteomics. And once you have this information, you understand the genealogy, you understand the genomics in as powerful way as those that are cultured. You can infer ecology and physiology, and you can do a very good candidatus proposal. And therefore, classification is really feasible. The thing is that if we stick to this, for example, 10,000 million of species, and we are very lucky, and we isolate all of them in pure culture, just the deposit of these 10 to the 7 type strains in duplicated will need 400 DSMZ-like culture collection, which is one of the best culture collection that we have in the world, only for type strains. And I think this is a Sisyphean task that it's nearly impossible. So nowadays, journals luckily require, like Systematic and Applied Microbiology was pioneering this request, is actually requiring the full genome or the almost full genome when you want to classify a species. The thing is that Barney Whitman, in the same time that Costas and me published the Candidatus paper, he proposed in 2015, also in the same special issue of Systematic and Applied, proposed that genome sequences could serve as type material for taxonomic description of prokaryotes. And 1 year later, in 2016, he proposed formally the changes of the bacteriological code in order to allow the DNA sequences to become an alternative type material. If this was going to be implemented, this would facilitate the way that we classify organisms and would not need to have this deposit of strains massively. But the most exciting thing of this proposal is that the goodness of this proposal also is that even marks that of very high quality should be standardized, of course, but of very high quality could also serve as type material for describing organisms, and therefore it would not be necessary to cultivate them in pure culture, and then the problem of naming the uncultured would be solved. Taking into account all these premises, Kostas Konstantinidis and Rudolf Amann and me, we published in ISME journal a manuscript in 2017, in where we warned taxonomists that something had to be done, because we were expecting an avalanche of marks and SACs that actually occurs that would deserve a name. At that manuscript, we said that either the ICNP is modified according to the proposals of Barney Whitman, allowing DNA to become type material, or ecologists should take their own way by creating a parallel nomenclature and therefore classification system, with the hope that this system would converge with the one for the cultured, but it would have its own nomenclatural code and would be governed by a recognized committee under the umbrella of a society that could be, for example, ISME. Of course, the paper attracted a lot of attention within the scientific community, and for example, Oren and Garrity, they replied to our manuscript in order to express their concerns to our approach. We could reply to their concerns later on in order to clarify our position. In the following years, several papers appeared in where they were raising their concerns on our approach, our published approach. Some of them, for example, were related to the lack of phenotypic information when we were classifying MACs and SACs based only on DNA, or how the genomic DNA becoming type material could have severe implications in clinical microbiology and other related disciplines. We were able to address all such concerns in other papers afterwards, and for example, we could clearly show that there were much more advantages applying this approach than concerns for the future of taxonomic of prokaryotic taxonomy. I think that between 2015 and 2020 there has been enough debate, not only in papers published in journals, but also in different forums, like for example meetings or congresses, in where this has been thoroughly debated. The defenders of DNA becoming type material, we believe that this would be a very important step forwards, because it would accelerate the process of publishing species, even for the cultured actually. This would discharge collections for avalanches of strains, and also in silico comparisons will facilitate diagnostic of new taxa. This would minimize many of the problems that currently occur, like, for example, neotype strain search and neotype strain proposals because of the loss or extinction of cultures. And also, and finally, it would be at least as modern as the zoological code that, as you can see, allows DNA to become a voucher already since at least 2012. So, after 5 years of discussion of the proposals of Barney, the proposals have been voted rejection. Therefore, genome cannot become type material nowadays. And if we want to start the process again, I think we cannot wait 5 years more to have a solution to this problem. There have been some voices saying that there has not been enough discussion within the scientific community, but I think that these papers have been out for 5 years, for a long time. The discussion was out there. We have been talking about this in different forums, in congresses, and I think from my point of view, we have had enough discussion. And all this defeat of the proposals of DNA becoming type material have brought us to this very moment in where you are sitting here listening to the proposals for the new path in classification of prokaryotes. The defenders of the DNA becoming type material, we believe that only taking into account everything, cultures, marks, and SACs, we will be able to achieve a universal classification. Also, we believe and we know that the genomic sequences have all the properties to guarantee a stable and natural classification system. And therefore, we also know and believe that DNA genomes can serve very well as an excellent voucher to be anchored to a name, and therefore give a stable nomenclatural framework to the uncultured and the cultured prokaryotes. And here I want to thank you for your attention, to all the people who have been helping me in the past, even if they do not agree with my opinion.